Welcome to the Meta Business Podcast. The Metaverse and Web3 are bringing about the biggest revolution since the internet itself. With your hosts, Paul the Prophet Dawalibi and Jeff the Juice Cohen, we will be bringing you the latest Metaverse business news and insight into what it all means. The Meta Business Podcast starts now.
From the boardroom to the Metaverse, this is the Meta Business Podcast. I am Paul the Prophet Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Jeff the Juice Cohen. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the official podcast of the Metaverse. What we do is we cover the most pressing Metaverse topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this very exciting industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. I've seen many of you have left reviews on our podcast. If you haven't done that already and you're a regular listener, go leave a review. Let everyone else know how much you love the podcast. It's how other people find this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Play or wherever you get this. And make sure to send an episode or two to a friend, a colleague, a coworker, whoever. Spread the word. Let them know how much you're enjoying the Meta Business Podcast. Jeff, how you doing this week?
Good. Busy week as always. I feel like I haven't talked to you as much as maybe normal, but the show must go on here.
The show must
regardless
go on.
Of where you are in the world, the show must go on.
It has been an interesting week. I will say, I get this feeling like every episode we're peaking, right? Like we're hitting new peaks. I will say the last week's episode I thought was our best. If you haven't listened to that, if you haven't tuned into that one, go check it out. It would be episode 17. I really enjoyed it. And I think we should start, Jeff, with a bit of I don't want to a little bit of a throwback to last week's episode, because we talked about Yuga Labs and the Bored Ape Yacht Club, obviously in that episode, buying CryptoPunks. But this week we had, I think, an equally big and important story coming out of Bored Ape Yacht Club. That's a mouthful to say fast. And I'll bring up this first story here. Bored Ape Yacht Club creator raises $450 million to build an NFT metaverse. So we had discussed that their pitch deck had leaked last week, right? And people were sort of dissecting it, and it was interesting. But now we get all the details. So they've raised $450 million. Obviously, we know they're buying CryptoPunks, and it values Yuga Labs at $4 billion. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's a good update to sort of the story from last week and to encourage you guys to go listen to last week's episode. But any thoughts on valuation here, size of the raise?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of that last week, where on the surface it sounds like a lot, but I think we were both pretty impressed with some of the numbers that were in that deck. So neither of us thought the $4 billion was that outrageous. Obviously, good on them now, kind of getting that to the tape. The other thing that was interesting, I think they did a drop, right? Like a token drop. I don't know if you were seen that, this ape token.
Yes, but only to owners. I think the priority was to owners of.
So basically, the way I understand it, right, is if you would owned an ape, you basically got dropped these tokens, which had a significant amount of value. So pretty cool, that the early members of the community were rewarded for that. Buying in early and got big allocations of those tokens.
Look, I've been privy to the deck. I went through it, and it's there's definitely impressive things in there. They did 137 million in revenue last year selling JPEGs. Like can we call a spade, right? Like selling art, which is phenomenal, right? At huge kind of margins. So it's hard to knock the $4 billion valuation. It's hard to poke holes in this. I think the one area where I worry about this is they a big part of their deck is this Metaverse project, right? This game they're building. It's an MMORPG, like World of Warcraft style, obviously not in that universe, but it's a game, right? And a lot of this valuation, I feel like, and a lot of the future of this business hinges on this game being a success. And what scares me, and this is not a Yuga Labs specific comment, this is a industry-wide general comment. Everyone sort of makes the assumption that building a hugely successful game is just sort of easy, right? Like we just have to say we're making a game and the game will be fun and successful. As if that's not like incredibly, incredibly hard. And, like most other forms of entertainment, right? For every one game for every Fortnite or WoW or any of these huge successes, there's 1,000 games that are made that no one ever plays. Mm-hmm. I worry that so much of this valuation and so much of this company's future really is hinging on the success of this game.
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, that's something I was actually going to ask you, and maybe you sort of already preempted that with the answer. But do you think the investors investing in this are looking at Yuga as a gaming company, a media company, an IP sort of just brand, or I guess a tech company? Like, what's the core advantage that they have?
I can tell you their deck really opens with none of those words. It opens with, we're all about culture, right? So it's a culture company. Meaning like it's changing brand. Culture. It's changing society. They're tapping into sort of this cultural shift. And, there's a lot of like that. At the heart of it, I think reading between the lines, because they never actually explicitly say it, almost this company's future really is as a gaming company, right? It will just so happen to have this foundation of NFTs and blockchain and those kinds of things. But I think all of their success, they're really hinging on this game. So hard to not call them a gaming company. Now, are they that today? Obviously not, right? Today, it's more, I don't know what you would call it today, to be honest. It's closer to an art gallery than any other business, really.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't know. I have seen nothing about the game, right? Obviously, hard to make judgment. But I suspect they're going to find it's harder, especially the category of game. We host the Business of Esports podcast also, which we spend all our time talking about gaming. MMORPGs, like the universe is littered with MMORPG failures. Even New World, right, didn't work, and that had Amazon behind it and a ton of hype early on. That is a really, really phenomenally difficult genre to go after. But if they succeed, $4 billion is going to seem like small peanuts, right? Like the sky's the limit if they do succeed. So I get the bet. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about and this has come up. I think we've had some interesting conversations around this. So it's good that you put this story in here to touch on. The headline here: inside plan for utopian metaverse city that will have almost no rules or police. So an architecture firm has plans to design a metaverse centering around self-governance. Zaha Hadid Architects, one of the world's most prominent architecture firms, has shared plans to develop a utopian digital world, according to a new report by CNN. Several illustrations of the futuristic and urban metaverse, which, by the way, if you're watching this, you can see them on screen. If you're listening, I'm sorry. Designated Liberland, I think that's how you pronounce it, were also shared by Zaha Hadid Architects. Curved buildings, a city hall, collaborative working spaces, shops, and business incubators can be found throughout the virtual platform. Perhaps most notably, it says the architecture firm's digital community will focus on self-governing ideals based on Liberland, a micronation founded in 2015 by Czech politician Vít Jedlička. It says, if you start off with a clean environment and you don't throw garbage around, that can be maintained without much policing, Zaha Hadid Architects principal architect Patrick Schumacher told CNN. So, you and I have had this discussion. Should the metaverse be sort of like international waters, anything goes, right? And it feels like that's the direction this is taking. I think there's also another interesting conversation here around architecture firms getting involved in the design of metaverse or the
and
metaverse
or
metaverse
at that. I mean, they're
true,
incredibly well known.
So curious to get your thoughts on both of those.
Well, the first one is, the second one is, I guess we can kind of hit that one first a little bit.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? I think, it's probably to be expected. We've always said, every business is eventually going to have to shift or have some focus into the metaverse. So it makes all the sense in the world that a firm like Zaha Hadid who their buildings in real life are pretty impressive architectural feats. Like they're each always like very unique, and like they're not just like cookie cutter buildings. I know there's a bunch of them in New York City, where obviously we both live. So yeah, it's pretty cool to bring kind of that real world architectural experience to the metaverse to build some of these cool unique structures there. I'm not sure I understand the thread between what that firm bringing this whole libertarian no police ideal, which is interesting. I mean, I don't know from a legal perspective how that will work, because obviously it's one thing to say, hey, there will be no laws in the metaverse. And I guess the question is, like, when we talk about policing, is it like, hey, you do something in the metaverse, like let's say I go and kill someone in the metaverse, like their digital avatar, like,
yep.
Technically that's not illegal. Like when you kill someone in Grand Theft Auto, the police don't come to your house and like kill and put you in jail. Having said that, then there are the questions of, okay, what if I steal your money, right? What if it's real money, money that's in the metaverse, but it obviously has a fiat, element where you can transfer it to fiat. If I steal your money in the metaverse, should there be a metaverse police? Should there be this Wild West where there's no laws? Or is, law enforcement going to come and say, hey, you stole $100,000 from the profit, like now you're going to jail? Like, I don't know where I fall on that. I'm curious to start where you fall on
that. You said something I want to just key in before I answer that, which I think I hadn't thought of, but when you said it, I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, what's the connection here between the architecture firm and this idea of like a totally lawless metaverse? Yeah. Seems weird. And then it got me thinking, like, why do we need traditional architecture firms in the metaverse anyways, right? Like, one of the things architects do is, they work with engineers, they'll come up with a design, a shape, right? But they want to make sure that the building will stay standing, right? If you make a huge dome, like that it's supported properly, right? It's all these kind of building considerations, none of which apply in the metaverse, right? Like almost none of the skill set, other than the creativity involved with architecture, literally nothing applies in the metaverse. So I would argue we don't really need real world architects operating in the metaverse. If anything, the experience of a real world architect may limit what we do in the metaverse, because you're rooted in these ideas of physical, metal and concrete and glass. So I thought that part was weird, but then I agree. It was also weird that, like, why are they saying it has to be lawless? Like, what does the architect care about how this metaverse is policed? My stance on this, I think, continues to be it has to be a completely open space. Now, you're right. You bring up this idea of theft, right? But to me is no different than if you play a game, right? If I play WoW, let's say, and there's a bug that crashes my computer, I go to the developer of WoW and I say, hey, this bug's crashing my computer. Give me customer support, right? It's not I don't like, I'm not looking for the police to rectify the issue. And you're right, stealing real, like, in-game currency that maybe has if someone trades me something in WoW and I pay way more for it because he tricks me than what it's worth, like, should he go to jail for that crime? It feels weird to connect virtual worlds and real worlds from a criminal sense, but I do think there has to be some kind of recourse to solve problems like that with the developers and owners, call it, of these metaverses. Like, I don't think it should just be, well, sorry, like, screw you, you lost your money. There has to be some recourse, but I don't think it should involve any kind of policing, and definitely not real world police.
Yeah, I guess it depends what lines you're crossing. I could think of scenarios that, where issues occur in the real world based on interactions in the metaverse. Obviously that then becomes different. But, the examples you said, I don't think we're going to see a world where you're going to be bringing in like the SEC to enforce, transactions that occur in the metaverse. Having said that, I am sure that as more and more of commerce and just the economy moves into the digital world, you're going to have these agencies, and maybe there'll be some sort of metaverse enforcement agency, that different countries will have. And, based on where the player is, or like where the player's physical body is, there will be an enforcement agency that kind of oversees behavior and activity in the metaverse, right? I mean, you wouldn't have thought that for social media, but you do kind of have that. Not
well, we don't have that for social media.
No, but we do. There are rules and laws and like hate speech and crime. Like, there are things you can say on the internet that
but
can get
controlled by the platforms.
Fair, that's a fair point,
right? Like, it's not like the police. If I go and say something horrible on Twitter, right? There's no police that's going to show up at my door. I may get canceled. I may,
like First Amendment here in the U.S. But if you did that in a different country, you might actually get the police.
True. No, this is why I think there can't be, right. Like I think it's a slippery slope of trying to figure out too many scenarios, and I think we're just better off by saying it's open, right? Like if I steal your money in the metaverse, you can go and complain to whoever the developer is, right? But if you come kill me in real life because you're so pissed as a consequence, like we've solved for that, right? Like real police will then get involved. There's no requirement to police the metaverse in that sense. There's a real life crime. I could see that, but I don't know. Maybe we just it's hard to sort of think through every possible future scenario when you don't really know how it's all necessarily going to play out.
To preface this next story that you're about to pull up, I mean, this one does, and I'll let you do your preamble, but this one does bring up an interesting scenario that I actually had never thought of. But when I read it, I was like, wow, that actually could happen and makes a decent amount of sense.
So let me introduce the story. It says here, which is, I think it's interesting, connected to the last one, obviously. It says the metaverse may bring new cyber risks. Here's what companies can do. And it says here, the metaverse has drawn, there's 3 bullet points. The metaverse has drawn hype in recent months with companies like Meta and Ralph Lauren rushing to get their foot in its virtual door. But cybercrime in the real world is already becoming more rampant. Checkpoint, a cybersecurity firm, reported a 50% increase in overall attacks per week on corporate networks last year compared with 2020. As businesses rush to plant their flag in the metaverse, not all may realize the full dangers of this new world. And they start with, you want me to read this example in the beginning? Because I think
it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
I actually thought it was pretty cool.
So it says here, it says, imagine discussing a confidential multi-million-dollar deal with your boss. The conversation ends and you both leave. A while later, you both meet again and you bring up your earlier conversation, but your boss has absolutely no recollection of the deal. What just happened? In the metaverse, this might mean you were the victim of a hacked avatar or deepfake, said Prabhu Ram, head of the industry intelligence group at Cyber Media Research. Deepfakes refer to manipulated digital figures that look or sound like someone else. So it is an interesting example here, right? It comes down to identity security, right? Where because you don't see me, you see some digital avatar that anyone could sort of be behind it and faking me. That people faking me in the metaverse may try and do nefarious things. Do you see this as a real risk, Jeff, or is this a little overblown and a little bit like, scare tactics for a headline?
I think it actually is. And that scenario, I mean, certainly if we're talking about enterprises moving into the metaverse, and if you're going to have a confidential meeting, in a boardroom, like where you're discussing quarterly results or something like that. Yeah. I mean, like if you don't know who's there, that's a huge enterprise level security risk, right? Like let's say, and this is something that's common, you see it, enterprises have to deal with this now with Zoom and different conferencing technology. But imagine if you were talking about a confidential deal and the telephone dial-in number was public and you didn't know who was on the line because they're not talking, but they happen to be dialed in and you're, either listening or blah, blah, or they're talking and, they're using some voice emulator that sounds like someone on that It is a risk. It's the same risk we see right now with maybe social media, stuff like that. Like anyone can go online, create a fake profile on LinkedIn and reach out to people. And you see it a lot. Like people get tricked not knowing who they're necessarily speaking to because it's not that hard to create a semi-credible LinkedIn profile or email address with one letter off or something like that. So it is a risk. It's not an unmanageable risk, but it is probably something as enterprises are thinking about coming into the metaverse, something they have to consider.
But wouldn't you agree
done via blockchain technology? But yeah, it's definitely something that will have to happen.
I mean, wouldn't you agree though that the metaverse, in some ways, because it increases the complexity required to fake an identity, in some ways probably reduces the overall number of these kinds of cyber crimes? Like, and I'll just give you a real example, right? Like when email, the internet first came out, it would have been phenomenally easy to spoof someone's email address, right? Or make it look like an email was coming from someone else. Because it's just text on a screen. It's not that technically difficult, right? You just change the header in the email and you can sort of fake where the email's coming from. Whereas like with the metaverse, while technology has gotten better, doing a great deepfake, whether it's emulating voice, emulating a face, right, in real time, requires a certain amount of computational complexity and AI and all kinds of tools, right? Like it's doable, but I find the complexity to commit these crimes is increasing. It's not decreasing.
That's fair. I think it depends what you're comparing it to. I think, if you're comparing it to email, absolutely 100% agree with you. There, obviously this example, this article is written with a purpose, like you said at the outset, a bias, if you will. But if you're comparing it to in-person meeting, of course, it's less secure.
True. I mean, I think in-person meetings are always going to be the most secure. I find some of these articles, like when they say 50% increase in overall attacks per week, like, was it 1 and it went to 1.5? Like, right? Like the percentage increase isn't really telling. And so my gut tells me there's not a real serious risk here. And the solutions are sort of simple, right? Like it's not that hard to have some kind of even like biometric on the human end, on the real life end, and then a badge, that's impossible to fake because it's on the blockchain, whatever, in the metaverse that says this is who I am, right? Like all these problems I think are solvable. It is interesting to think though that there will be an entirely sort of new set of cybersecurity products, companies, etc., that have to tackle them.
Yeah, I think that last part is the key. I didn't take the article to read like, oh my God, the metaverse won't work because of this insurmountable problem. It's more like this firm trying to be one of the thought leaders of figuring out what those solutions are. And you just identified two pretty darn good ones. But that there will be a whole industry of these kind of same way when the internet and when computers came up, you started having cybersecurity kind of 1.0. Now you'll have 2.0 metaverse
or 3.0 if they want to stay consistent with the. Let's talk about FTX. FTX in the news this week, Jeff. And this one, the headline here: FTX announces support for Web3 gaming, begins in-house NFT game development. Sam Bankman-Fried, who's the founder and CEO of FTX, announced FTX's entry into Web3 gaming through the acquisition of Good Luck Games. The FTX CEO revealed that the in-house developers would build a white label package for the exchange. FTT price attempts recovery in response to the key development in the FTX ecosystem. So here's what I want to focus on, though. I think, unless you have some other ideas on this, is the tweets that Sam put out, which I think are extremely telling, where he announced this. And I'll just read some of them. I have them up here, but I'll read some of them. He says, FTX is really excited to support Web3 gaming, but we have a very specific approach. Support great games. Too many times our ecosystem has tried to build out NFT-enabled games, but forgotten the first step, which is to build a great game. And just as importantly, Web3 should make a game better, not neutral or worse. If integrating crypto hurts a game, we don't want to do it. We're excited to support a number of our gaming partners with a full Web3 suite. We also want to have an in-house case to develop our white label package. But the single most important thing about that in-house game is, again, that it's a great game. Now he goes on to talk about how they love the team and some of the other reasons why they're so excited about this, and that they play the game, which is doubly interesting. But look, I can't help but the prophet was right. One of those moments we put up all the graphics.
Well,
I got so
there's
much.
Two explanations here. Either the prophet was right or Sam is listening to the podcast. So,
Of course, Sam was listening to the podcast. Of course, he got this idea from the Meta Business podcast. But I got a lot of hate. I'm telling you, a lot of hate for the comments I made at the Play to Earn Crowd Create conference thing I did, where I said everyone's lost track of what's important here, which is making a great game. And Sam, I consider a genius. Obviously, he has built maybe the most incredible company in the entire crypto industry. It's impossible to disagree with this approach, right? But it feels novel.
Well, I'm Mr. Devil's Advocate, but here I don't. This has been our mantra sort of all since we started this podcast and started talking about Play to Earn. And I know you said you got a lot of hate, but I don't think it's a super hot take. Like, I think the industry is starting to recognize that some of the early iterations of these games weren't fun. And it was always, hey, the fun games are coming. So I think that Sam is absolutely right. Prophet was, of course, also absolutely right. And I don't have too much to add because I think we're fully in agreement here. It has to start with the games and it becomes a mechanic. Nobody would ever say, hey, I want to create an in-game purchase game. Like, no. You have a game, it's fun, and then there's in-game purchases. Like it's a monetization metric, not the game.
No, but he says a couple of things that I think you're right. I think maybe people are coming around to the idea that good games are around the corner, which I don't know, right? They may be. But he says something that I think most of the crypto world misses, which is he says Web3 should make a game better, not neutral or worse. And I will extend his comment one step further, and we have to communicate to gamers how it makes it better. If we can't explain how this makes it better in some very real way for that gamer, no one's going to care, right? And the masses of gamers that everyone wants to pick up in the crypto world, none of them will care. And so I think it's a level of insight I haven't seen from anyone else yet. And to get the CEO of a big crypto company saying, if integrating crypto hurts the game, we won't do it, right? Like, that's an interesting take, because he could have said, look, if integrating crypto makes us a ton more money, we'll do it, even if it hurts the game a little bit, right? Which is the position of just about everyone else in the industry. So I thought this was really refreshing as a take, and it'll be interesting to see, in my mind, Jeff, what they do with a game development studio in-house and how they manage to build that while also trying to push, the adoption of digital assets, which is their whole mantra.
Do you think this is part of a bigger strategy to bring a lot more in-house? Because I know they're building the white label product. They've hired a bunch of people in gaming. So obviously they have a bigger strategy here, but I guess I hadn't been aware previously that it was going to be to bring a bunch of development teams in-house. So do you think fast forward 18 months from now, we're going to see FTX be as big of a brand in gaming as Zynga? And that's obviously a little bit hyperbole, but are they going to have 10 different teams building 15, 20 games?
I don't know if the number's 15 or 20, but I definitely would get behind and will probably put money on betting that we see at least another 2 kind of bets, whether it's an investment or an acquisition. When you're at the scale of an FTX, right? Like, you can't go timid or go like small scale. I think the interesting part of this play is there's clear conviction around gaming and how it integrates with their core crypto business. I wouldn't be surprised if FTX over time, puts $1 billion more into gaming. That would not shock me. And I think that it's also just smart, and it's going to increase the competition for game developers, which is an already like super heated market, which I think is interesting. We need to start a game development studio, I think.
We're a year too late.
Yeah. I want to end on one last very quick story here, which we'll spend 2 seconds on. And it's another game developer, which I think is interesting. Gamefam raises $25 million to build games for Roblox. And I have just one quick question for you here. Obviously, we're big fans of Roblox from a metaverse perspective. I think they're ahead of the curve of just about anyone else. But is that a lot of money when you're building for only one platform, Jeff? Like, how big is the risk when you're so tied to the success of just one platform who future is bright, but it's definitely not certain?
It is a risk. I mean, and it's a risk in a couple different ways. I mean, one, the rev share on Roblox is actually super low relative. So actually, it's funny. All the developers complain about the 30% rev share on Apple and Google. It's actually Roblox takes 70% of revenue. So it's literally flipped, which is kind of mind blowing if you think about
Where's
it.
Tim Sweeney?
That they're able to get away with that. I guess it's because most of the developers on there are UGC and small creators, so they probably don't even necessarily realize, and certainly can't bargain. That I imagine that number will start to shift because Roblox is incentivized to bring more creators on. They've talked about that, so I would imagine maybe that number shifts over time. But big rev share take. It's also still limited in terms of geography and age, right? So you're developing for a very limited demographic, and I know Roblox has made massive steps towards trying to expand both those things, but it's still been a challenge for them. So you're kind of limited there. And then the last thing, and probably the most important, as we're thinking about sort of the professionalization of UGC platforms, which I think is actually a pretty cool trend, and I'm a big fan of the guys at Gamefam, and actually we know some of their investors. Convoy was the lead investor, which we're big fans of them. But discoverability is a big issue for these platforms. There's no real way to advertise very well and do publishing on the platform. So I'm sure that's something they're doing in other places, but there's no like great app store optimization or advertising like there is with Apple and Google for Roblox.
Yeah, I think this is great for Gamefam. I think it's exciting when you get a big raise like this in the industry in general. I think the investors here are not going to make a good return, and I probably not anywhere near what they think they're going to make, just because look, like the numbers are what they are. $25 million raise means the business at least worth $100 million. If you're a VC fund, you need to have at least $1 billion exit, right? I mean, that's what you need to believe you can get to. I just don't see how you build $1 billion game development studio just on Roblox today. Now,
well, that's a great question.
Would that be radically different?
Because that is a good question. Like, how big does Roblox have to get? Because I guarantee you there were probably people saying that about mobile, 10 years ago. Hey, mobile, probably. There's only this many gamers, there's only this many and I don't know what the adoption curve needs to look like and what the math and the model kind of shows. But I suspect there will be $1 billion company that builds, is sort of the Zynga for Roblox. Like I bet there will be Gamefam. I have no idea, but you're bullish on Roblox. I know that, so you probably should believe this.
I'm very bullish on Roblox, but I don't think other people can just hitch. It's like saying, why haven't we seen? Even take an even bigger example in more traditional media, right? Have we seen a $1 billion media company built just on YouTube? No. There's media companies that are that big that put their stuff on YouTube, but among other places, right? And there are influencers and creators on YouTube who make good living, right? Maybe even great living, or maybe $50-100 million businesses, but multi-billion-dollar scale where you're sort of locked into just one platform, and YouTube's 10x the size of a Roblox right now, right? Like it feels like a large hurdle, and I worry that maybe the investors didn't think that one through. I don't know. It's a lot of sexiness, right? And Roblox growth has been tremendously good. And maybe it's just a 10-year play, right? Like, Jeff, I think you could probably convince me if you're saying, yeah, in 10 years, when Roblox is at 500 million users, could we see that? You're right. Like, maybe someone was saying this 10 years ago about mobile. So I can buy maybe the longer term story. I don't know if I buy sort of the venture fund that's in here needs an exit within 2 or 3 years. That I'm a little more concerned if we're shortening sort of the time period. Man, that time flew by. Jeff, that brings us to the end of this week's podcast. I just want to remind everyone, go leave a 5-star rating and review, guys, on the podcast. Send it to a friend, a colleague, a coworker. Share the podcast with everyone you know who's interested in gaming, interested in the metaverse, interested in crypto, all the topics we cover on this show. Jeff, thank you as always. To our audience, thank you guys for tuning in every week. And don't forget, the future is fun. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us here on Meta Business. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review, and tell your friends, family, and colleagues all about us. Also, make sure to follow Meta TV on all socials to get more of the best metaverse content anywhere. Tune in every week for another episode of Meta Business.